All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about something that's, a huge deal for so many families, bringing a parent over to Australia for good. We're going to break down exactly what you need to know about the Subclass 103 parent visa so you have a really clear picture of how it all works. Look, it's a massive, life-changing decision, right? You want to reunite your family, have your parents here for that next big chapter. But let's be honest, the visa system can feel, well, just totally overwhelming. And that's exactly why we're doing this, to cut through all that noise. So let's dive in. The Subclass 103 visa, that's the one that's designed to be the permanent fix. But hold on. Before you start drowning in all the forms and details, you've got to realize that your entire journey, your whole application, really comes down to just one key question. And this is it. The big question is, are you a standard applicant or could you possibly fit into the retiree applicant category? Because the answer to that changes everything. It literally decides which rules you have to play by and, get this, which ones you might get to skip altogether. So yeah, let's figure out which path is yours. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll cover the rules that apply to basically everyone. Then, we'll get into the 3 big tests for standard applicants. After that, we'll look at that special retiree pathway, and we'll finish up with a simple checklist so you know what to do next. All right, first things first, let's talk about the universal checklist. These are the absolute basics, the things everyone has to meet. Think of them as the first hurdles you've got to clear no matter what. So these are the non-negotiables, really. Every single applicant has to meet the health and character requirements, that's standard stuff. Also, if there's only money owed to the Australian government, that needs to be sorted out. Anyone of 18 has to sign the Australian Value Statement, and this is a big one. If you've had a visa cancelled or refused before, that could be a problem. So yeah, these are the boxes everyone has to tick. Oh, and here's a super important heads up you need to know from the get-go. You absolutely cannot apply for this permanent 103 visa if you already have or have even just applied for the temporary subclass 870 visa. It's strictly one or the other. So you really have to make the right choice from the start. Okay, so now let's zoom in on what most people will be looking at, the standard applicant path. If that retiree option isn't for you, then there are 3 major hurdles you've got to get over. Let's just call them the 3 key tests. First up is sponsorship. Pretty straightforward. Your parent needs a sponsor, and that's usually their child. Now, that child has to be what's called a settled Australian citizen, a permanent resident, or an eligible Kiwi. Settled just means they've been living here legally for a while. This person is the one who officially backs the application. All right, test number 2. And this is the big one. It's called the balance of family test. The idea behind it is pretty simple, actually. The government just wants to make sure the parent has strong roots in Australia through their kids. But the way they measure that is, well, it's very, very specific. So here's the main rule boiled down. To pass this test, at least half of your parents' children have to be living permanently in Australia. Simple math, right? 2 kids, 1 has to be here. 4 kids, 2 have to be here. But what happens if you don't quite hit that 50% mark? Well, there's a really important workaround. You can also pass the test if more of your children live here in Australia than in any other single country. So, for example, say you've got 3 kids. One's here in Australia, one's in the UK, and one's in Canada. You're good to go because Australia has more of your kids than any other individual country. And the third and final test is something called the Assurance of Support, or AOS. What is that? Basically, it's a financial guarantee. Someone, usually the sponsor, has to put up a bond. They're promising the government that they'll support the parent financially, so they won't need to claim most Social Security benefits for a few years after they arrive. Okay, so sponsorship, balance of family, assurance of support, those are the 3 big hurdles. But what if I told you there's a way to just skip all of them? Well, for a very specific group of people, there is. And that's what we're going to talk about now, the retiree pathway. Now, I've got to be really clear here. The rules for this are super specific and time-locked. To even be considered, your parent needed to have a subclass 405 or 410 visa on one particular day, May 8th, 2018. Not only that, but they can't have held any other major visa since then. It's a tiny window, I know, but if you fit through it, the advantages are just huge. And this just shows you exactly how massive those advantages are. Just look at this. A retiree applicant, they don't need a sponsor, they don't have to worry about that tricky balance of family test, and they don't need an assurance of support. All 3 of those big hurdles we just talked about, gone, completely waived. It's a game changer. But of course, there's a trade-off. With these big exemptions come some big responsibilities. Retiree applicants have to cover all their own healthcare costs while the visa is processing. That means they've got to have good health insurance the whole time, a policy that covers anything medically necessary. So there you have it. We've gone through the rules for everyone, the standard path, and the special retiree path. Hopefully, you've got a much clearer idea of where you fit. So, what's next? What should you be thinking about right now? Here's a simple checklist to get you moving. Step 1. Make sure you tick all those universal boxes. Health, character, all that stuff. Step 2. Figure out which camp you're in, standard or retiree. Step 3. If you're standard, you need to lock in your sponsor and do the math for the balance of family test. Once you know your path, then, and only then, should you start getting all your documents together. And that really brings us to the final and maybe most important point. The Subclass 103 is a permanent visa, yes, but it is not a fast one. In fact, it's famous for having incredibly long waiting lists. So just figuring out if you're eligible, that's only step 1. The real question you've got to ask yourself is, knowing how long the road ahead is, when does your family's journey need to start? Because it's probably sooner than you think.